I'm trying to understand what could possibly possess a parent. Did I say possess? That's an interesting word, isn't it? Possess. I have an idea what would possess a parent to do this, to drag a child, a small child, to a drag show where men dress as women and seek sexual gratification by parading around small children in various stages of undress, twerking, thrusting their pelvises and grinding their hips onto the floor in front of children. And the parents are forcing their children to watch this and thinking how wonderful they are, how progressive they are, and how the rest of us who object are the extremists. On what planet is that not child abuse? Why don't they just cut to the quick and sit their children down in front of a TV and let them watch pornography? So I know exactly what or whom would possess a parent to do something like that. Now imagine being the responsible adult and walking into such a disgraceful event and objecting to children being sexualized, objecting to children being abused, calling out these so-called parents who are abusing their children, and the responsible adult is violently removed from the premises and thrown to the ground. And then the perverted, abusive parents call the police on this responsible adult. And that responsible adult, in this case, a Christian pastor, is arrested the next day for a hate crime. This happened in Calgary, where their out of control Christian-hating mayor, Jyoti Gondek, and her city council passed a law making it a hate crime to object to sexualizing and grooming children. If you show up at a drag show and dare to object to big, hairy men wearing wigs and thongs thrusting their junk in the direction of a small child, you're a bigot, you're a hater, you're going to jail. This, ladies and gentlemen, is spiritual warfare. The criminals are the parents who take their innocent children to these events and the transvestite strippers who perform their grotesque and perverted acts in front of small children. The left hates truth, beauty, and goodness, like a vampire hates the sunlight. And I am not here to placate the left. I am not here to try and win the hearts and minds of the left. And as I said on Viva Frei yesterday, I'm not here to wake up the sheep. I am here to gather the lions. And I want to gather the lions so that we can demoralize the left and defeat the left. It's that simple. Demoralize and defeat. And we now find ourselves in a country where Christians are now targeted for arrest or expulsion from school for practicing their faith, where churches are firebombed and desecrated, and the police do nothing. And Calgary now holds the distinction of having the most crazed, unhinged mayor perhaps in Canadian history. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are worse mayors than Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek. I can't imagine. I mean, what has happened to Calgary? And where is Alberta Premier Danielle Smith in all of this? She has to act. And the Calgary police, my God, since COVID, they have turned into a bunch of thugs. They are absolutely murdering their own reputation. It's a disgraceful police force. And that pains me to say that, because normally I defend the police. How does the rest of Alberta feel about Calgary? Maybe Alberta should separate from Calgary first before they think about leaving Canada. This country is in rough shape. And so her thugs and the Calgary police yesterday arrested a Christian pastor, Derek Reimer, who objected. He was the responsible adult. He walked into a library where they were holding an all-ages drag show where transvestite strippers thrust their junk in the direction of small innocent children, and yet the pastor is the extremist. So a group of irresponsible parents, perverts, throw him to the ground. The next day, he's arrested. Got it? That's Canada in 2023. Shiela Gunn Reid, Rebel News Alberta chief and host of The Gun Show, is here. Shiela, how are you?
Well, thanks for having me on the show.
Have we heard, what is the status? Do we know where Pastor Reimer is at this moment?
I have a team of journalists, a rotating team of journalists staked out at the Calgary jail. Unfortunately, this is a regular beat for the journalists in Calgary, staking out the jail to see when a pastor will be released, as is the state of Calgary these days. But we're getting mixed signals. So one of my journalists was able to get a guard at the jail to respond and say that they had released Pastor Derek at midnight. But we haven't been able to get in touch with Pastor Derek. His phone is still at his house. Nobody has heard from Pastor Derek. So frankly, I'm under the impression that the guards are trying to send my journalists away from the jail because the pastor is still behind bars so that they can release him without much fanfare is what I think is happening. I can't confirm that, and we can't get confirmation from the jail whatsoever. But it is odd that the pastor has not been in contact with anybody, including the journalists who are covering his story like it's the OJ trial right now. But like I said, this is a common occurrence in Geordie Gondek's Calgary. We know that Pastor Art was persecuted for feeding the homeless from the very beginning of the pandemic. I should tell you that Pastor Derek Reimer was client number 2 of the Democracy Fund's Fight the Fines initiative, also getting in trouble for ministering to Calgary's forgotten people in the downtown core. He was also in trouble for illegal public gatherings for doing what he believes is the right thing to do, and that's to stand up for the vulnerable and the downtrodden, which is exactly how he ended up at Calgary's Seton Library, standing up for the vulnerable during a drag queen story hour. And what's most atrocious in all of this is Calgary's mayor is trying to make protesting her friends, allies, and her own public policies illegal. She has said that she's going to weaponize the anti-harassment bylaw in Calgary, which is unconstitutional on its face, by the way.
So the mayor is trying to weaponize, because I never understood this. I always thought that municipalities under the Municipality Act can only pass bylaws. Not, right. I mean, these are criminal charges that have been laid against Pastor Reimer. So, I mean, how does a mayor weaponize the police force and pass, like these anti-hate crimes laws?
Sure. Calgary, they have an unconstitutional street harassment bylaw that's never really been used, although the mayor has said that she's going to use it against people who drag in publicly funded facilities. It's a $400 anti-harassment fine. Now, this is anything but harassment. Harassment is very clearly defined in the criminal code as a pattern of behavior of intimidation and stalking. That's not what this is. These are people protesting of public resources to the sexualization of children. But the police have not been issuing these fines. So on Sunday, the mayor took to her Twitter account to say that the police are not doing enough. She's going to write an even stricter bylaw. And then right after she does that, the police then start showing up at Pastor Derek Reimer's door, telling him he's been now charged with criminal code offenses of mischief and causing a disturbance. So it seems as though the mayor has publicly tried to shame the police into arresting this man, and then so they did.
With more, as we discuss the charges against Christian Pastor Derek Reimer, who's standing up for innocent children, standing against parents who are sexualizing and grooming their own innocent children. Shiela Gunn Reid is with us, Rebel News Alberta Bureau Chief, host of The Gun Show. What has happened to Calgary? I mean, Alberta we think of as the province of the free. I like, it's like Florida in the U.S., but Calgary, why is Calgary such an anomaly in Alberta?
I think it's a big city problem, and I think it's everywhere in this country. So yes, indeed, Alberta is probably the most conservative place in this entire country, and I think probably one of the more conservative places in North America. But like anywhere else in this country, the big cities are dominated by progressives. Edmonton is a hellscape they should fence off. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's the seat of government, where that's all the government workers are, and that's where the bureaucrats are. But big cities in conservative places are often progressive. Look at Houston, you know, it doesn't matter where you are. It can be Texas, it can be Alberta, but once you get these big urban megacities, they just get progressive, and eventually they become so big that they govern the rest of the place with their bad progressive ideas. And that is my concern for Alberta if Calgary gets any more powerful.
Yes, I should issue a correction. And it's my bad. This was an all ages. This was a drag queen reading story time, not an all ages drag show. Although those are going on in the country as well, and people are protesting those in Alberta or in Calgary, and they're being charged and fined and so forth. And of course, we have a young student, a Catholic school, a high school student in Ontario, who's been expelled from school for standing up for his. It's not even Catholic principles or Christian principles. It's common sense.
Sure.
It's plain and simple morality. Anyway, what about the Calgary police? I mean, they are really murdering their reputation through COVID. You mentioned the way they treated Pastor Artur Pawlowski. And now in this case, I mean, I saw the Rebel News video of that cop who was asking for the reporter for identification just so that he would answer his questions. And he was just acting like a complete jerk. What's going on with cops in Calgary?
You know, what I've seen, and it's similar in Edmonton too, that the morale of the police force continues to just, every time you think it's at rock bottom, the next year it continues to get lower. And I think the good cops are quietly leaving the force because they don't want to be the COVID enforcers, the progressive street team of thugs for the likes of Jyoti Gondek or the Edmonton mayor. They don't want to be those guys. And I understand there are reasons for leaving, but that leaves behind the bad guys. These aggressive robocops, like we saw in that video with our journalist Sid Fizzard, who was simply standing on a public sidewalk filming the actions of the police as they were taking away Derek Reimer from his home. But yeah, there's a real problem with the police in Calgary. It's not just Derek Reimer. It's not Pastor Art Pawlowski either. We saw the cops taking away the most docile and kind man you'll ever meet, Tim Stevens, the pastor who was taken away in front of his screaming, crying, sobbing children who were reaching at him through the bars of the cop car. And his only crime was opening his church and not turning away congregants during the time of COVID. And I'll never forget that one Calgary cop who tried to quote scripture to a pastor to justify what he was doing. So I agree with you. I mean, Calgary's cops, to use the language of the left, they need a great reset down there because I think they've forgotten, many of them, why they joined the force in the first place.
Many of us conservatives had very high hopes with Danielle Smith, Premier Smith. Where is she in all of this? Is this on her radar? Does the city of Calgary gets its powers through the Municipality Act, and that's a provincial jurisdiction? Can the Premier do anything? Will she do anything?
You know, she's really stuck between a rock and a hard place here because while she was elected on not bringing in restrictions, repealing restrictions, standing up for peaceful protesters and free speech, and I do truly believe that she believes those things, she is, or she has to be careful to not be perceived to be meddling in the justice system. You know, at the same time, where we want a premier who stands up for the rights of peaceful protesters and freedom of religion, we also don't want a premier akin to Justin Trudeau meddling in the prosecution of his friends like SNC-Lavalin or any of the corrupt companies that Trudeau deals with. So she has to walk a very fine line of advocating for policy issues, but not directly reaching into the court system.
Well, she doesn't have to address this case specifically, but she can address the attempts by the call out the mayor for her attempts to criminalize legal protests.
Sure. And absolutely, you're 100% right. It is common practice here in Alberta for our premiers to criticize municipalities when they get out of control. And what the mayor is doing is unconstitutional. And she does need to hear it from our premier, who is elected specifically to on a platform of defending the rights of Albertans.
In the meantime, people can support Pastor Derek. You've got a website up for him, fightcensorshipfines.com.
Yes, and we've got one more that's even a little bit more specific to see all of our coverage on the ongoing tribulations of Pastor Derek Reimer. You can go to savepastorderek.com. And I should let your listeners know that Pastor Derek has a lawyer provided to him at no cost to him from the same law firm as Pastor Art. And that's being provided at no cost to Derek Reimer through that same website, savepastorderek.com, in partnership with the Democracy Fund. So if people want to pitch in to help cover his legal fees, because boy, he's going to need some help, they can do that at savepastorderek.com. And the good news is, through that partnership with the Democracy Fund, the donations there qualify for a charitable tax receipt.
Fantastic. Great work, Shiela. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shiela Gunn Reid, Rebel News Alberta Bureau Chief, host of The Gun Show, Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, rebelnews.com.